Hello and welcome back to Kitco Mining's Digging Deep with me, Paul Harris, in which we take a closer look at some of the most interesting news items in the mining and exploration space. Joining me today is Christopher Ecclestone, Principal and Mining Strategist at Hallgarten Company. Chris, welcome back to Kitco.
Yes, thank you.
What a week. Gold is at $3,300 per ounce and happy faces everywhere, unless of course you are in certain parts of Africa. Ghana has been changing the rules so that only the government can buy gold from small-scale artisanal miners, which comprise a large portion of its gold sector. And things are not going well for Barrick Gold in Mali, with the government there threatening to seize its asset. Chris, perhaps no wonder that Barrick wants to drop gold from its name.
Yeah, look, Barrick has flirted with copper before, and did create a spin out to that extent, and then copper went off the boil, and then they returned to their knitting. So I'm not sure whether you can put lipstick on a pig by taking the gold out of Barrick. People are buying Barrick for its gold, and it's just not big enough in copper to be sort of relevant. Does it own one of the world's top 10 copper mines? No. Does it have anything under development that is likely to knock the ball out of the park? No. So why do that?
That's, I think, a very interesting point, Chris. A number of gold producers, a number of the CEOs still talk about gold companies and having gold in your name, attracting a gold premium among investors.
Yeah.
What's your view there? Do gold companies still get a
No,
gold
I'd
premium?
agree with them. I would agree with you. If you're 90% gold, you're gold. It's as simple as that. Why try and adopt some other guys? Because copper has come and copper is gone and copper has come back and whatever. Gold does the same, but the two things are moving in tandem at the moment. But the second the gold stays still or goes up and copper doesn't and goes in reverse, they're all going to be regretting what they've been doing and dabbling with name changes. I mean, why bother?
And of course, we are talking about cyclical commodities, so that up and down will happen. Chris, you focus a lot on Ghana. What is going on there? Ghana's a lot of companies.
This is good news in Ghana. It's bad news for the Chinese. It's really bad news, and I'm loving it because the Chinese have been rampaging through Ghana, bribing people, creating environmental disasters, but moreover, salting away and shifting out of the country enormous amounts of artisanal production, whether it's production that they're doing themselves through the army of illegal Chinese artisanals within the country, or whether it's a material that they've bought up from local artisanals, and they're taking it all out of the country, no royalties, no taxes, doesn't figure in the statistics for the Ghanaian economy, so it makes the economy look smaller than it actually is. And so they're now basically saying all artisanals have to bring the gold to the state to collect the money. I don't think that the state is going to be giving the native artisanals a bad price. Maybe 5% discount, 10% discount to the reigning gold price. Because remember, these people are just bringing little bags of nuggets. They're not bringing in, refined bars. So there's a discount for whatever it is. But, the local artisanals will be getting, a price that's as good, if not better, that they're getting from Chinese traders. The people who lose out in this are going to be the illegal Chinese operators within Ghana. I want to not see them regularized. I want to see them driven out of Ghana. They are bad news. And for the Ghanaian economy, they're operating in an unequal way and they're creating environmental disasters And they're feeding corruption. Many of the operations there that are operated by the Chinese do so on the back of bakshish, paying off local chiefs or government officials or customs officials or whatever to get their ill-gotten gains out of the country, and it's not on.
Now, that's a similar issue that many countries here in Latin America face. Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Brazil, they've all got very big, thriving, illegal artisanal gold sectors. So I imagine, depending on the results the Ghanaian government has, this could perhaps be a model to deploy in other countries.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, but there's a difference here. But Brazil doesn't have 30,000 Chinese illegals. And none of the other countries in Latin America have that scale of Chinese legal artisanal miners. And these are the people who have to be driven out. One thing is to have locals doing it, because if the locals do it, they're feeding their family, they're buying in the local shop, the money trickles into the local economy, or pours into the local economy. With the Chinese illegals, the profits, the value add, everything is going out of the country. The equipment that is being brought in, smuggled in, who knows, is Chinese equipment. They're making 100% out of the deal, and good riddance to them.
Okay. Also hurting in Africa this past week is Fortuna Mining, which said it will sell its interests in Burkina Faso that include the Yaramoko mine for $130 million US. The sale marks an abrupt end to Fortuna's sojourn in Burkina Faso. The company obtained the assets there with its $884 million all-share Roxgold acquisition in 2021. Fortuna has produced about 400,000 ounces from Yaramoko through the end of last year, but it's earned about $202 million from those ounces, which means this venture into Burkina Faso has resulted in a considerable loss. Chris, maybe Fortuna Mining will think of changing its name back to Fortuna Silver.
No, I don't think so. But what they should do is take the lesson from the word Fortuna, which of course is Spanish, and they should have stuck to Latin America, because they wandered off into an area where they had, local knowledge, local skills, track record, and wandered into an area that was a different language, a different mindset, and they've lost their shirt. It's as simple as that. And look, Burkina Faso was already a country way before 2021 that had multiple question marks over it. So buying into that, they gave Roxgold a life buoy that Roxgold's shareholders could head off into the sunset with a big gain, and Fortuna Silver's shareholders go down the drain. Really bad deal, really bad timing, but they should have known better. If they'd done their due diligence, they would not have gone into Burkina Faso.
So you're obviously not a big fan of Fortuna's West Africa strategy there. I spoke with CEO Jorge a couple of weeks ago, and he spoke about the company's looking to buy more assets. It's looking to get up and over 500,000 ounces a year of gold production. Sounds like you think they should be looking back in Latin America again.
Yep, absolutely. Or into North America, but Africa was not a good choice for them. I always regarded them, particularly because they have Latin management, and basically Latin control. They should have stuck to their knitting.
Okay, well, some good news for Fortuna this week, as Argentina, where the company has its Lindero mine, said its peso will now be allowed to float freely within a band of between 1,000 and 1,400 pesos per dollar, after 6 years of currency controls, after the administration of President Javier Milei obtained a $20 billion loan deal from the International Monetary Fund. Ending capital controls will allow investors such as Fortuna to repatriate profits. Chris, you've been bullish on Argentina under Milei for quite some time. What could this do for mining investment in the country?
Mining investment is irrespective of this. I mean, mining investment was already going well. One has to, the headline news here is not actually correct, because it's only profits in the financial years beginning from the 1st of January 2025 that are freely repatriatable. That is not the case if you've got a trapped profit from 2023 or earlier that you haven't been able to repatriate. You're still stuck with having to do, difficult things to get that out. So it's only going forward from the start of this year that profits are repatriatable, not historical profits. So that is one of the reasons why, because I thought that all these people talking about, the SEPA's gone, there's going to be an enormous flood of dividending out by multinationals. And we're not just talking miners here, we're talking about toothpaste manufacturers, auto manufacturers, all sorts of multinationals that operate in Argentina, sending out historic profits that they've built up in pesos. No, they cannot. We saw transactions in the mining sector around 2 years ago where, before Milei was elected, where Stellantis, which is basically Renault, the French car company, made big investments into Los Azules, the copper project, and into Argentina Lithium. And they did that because they had trapped profits. That investing of trapped profits maybe will still go on, maybe not. But the profits are still trapped. So only profits going forward that are free.
But new investors coming in, potentially building new mines, they'll be able to take advantage of this and have that line of sight, that clarity that they'll be able to take.
Yeah, absolutely. And also it makes it that much easier for the imports of equipment, because that aspect has been freed up. And, for a long time, companies were hamstrung in getting import licenses for exactly what they wanted for their mines. So now that's freed up. And you've also got, even before this move, you've got the RIGI, the plan for large investments out there, which I think involves projects over 200 million, into which almost all the lithium projects fall. All the copper projects fall in there. Some of the gold projects are smaller than that. Some of the uranium investments are smaller than that. But the ones that are 200 plus, which is pretty much most of the big stuff, falls within that category. And so this is like the second leg of making Argentina great again in mining. So we shall see.
And this is one that a lot of people were watching for, because, as you say, the ability to get money in and out is fundamental for investment cycles. It also doesn't just impact or apply to companies; it applies to normal people, common people as well. So, people can take their pesos that they earn and buy dollars more freely, get their money out to perhaps invest in real estate in Miami. So, what's been the reaction in the country amongst people at large?
Well, the peso has actually strengthened, much to my surprise. And I thought that it could actually weaken, but it hasn't. People have been charging in and buying pesos. Not sure why, but it's all good.
Okay, staying in Latin America, Ecuador's President Daniel Noboa was re-elected and now has a full term during which his tough stance on crime, violence and the cocaine trade will likely continue. The president-elect will also likely continue to support the development of Ecuador's mining sector, with 6 projects at the development stage representing at least $10 billion in investment coming up for construction decisions during the 2025-2029 presidential term. Copper developers, including SolGold and Solaris Resources, shares rose on the news. Chris, does this set the platform for 4 strong years coming for the mining sector in Ecuador?
No, I would say so, but some of these companies need to get their act together. The business, you have these windows of opportunity in Latin America, not just in Ecuador, but in other places as well, where you have to get into production, because once you're in production, you become real. If the government changes and then it shuts down the mine, jobs are lost. And that type of thing dissuades the governments from taking unilateral self-destructive actions. But if you've got a project where you're just piling up mineral resource, and let's do another mineral resource, and let's do a PEA, and then ignore the PEA, do another mineral resource, and you're just going on and, spinning your wheels in a classic Vancouver fashion, then if the government changes, the government says, well, if we shut down this project, or we say no more mining in this district or area or whatever, it's not actually going to cost any jobs because there are no jobs. And it's not going to cost us any export income because there is no export income. And these miners think that they should be protected forever in their indolence. But no, I'm sorry, if you're not a miner, you're not contributing. You're just an explorer, and you're paying a foreign drill crew and a foreign drill company to drill a few holes, and you're taking samples outside the country, and you've got fly-in, fly-out geos. You're not leaving much of an economic mark in the country. And so if things turn around, and as we saw in Ecuador, the country had more than 10 years lost because the government in Quito thought, well, mining's not that important. And the miners said, the explorers said, we're all here, we're drilling, we're doing stuff. And, it didn't really affect things because the projects weren't advancing. But if projects get into operation and they start generating royalties and taxes and jobs and trickle down, then it's that much harder for governments to shut them down because, you get the backlash.
It would seem to be a great time for developers. It would seem to be a great time for developers in Ecuador. Gold price at record levels, copper price at relatively high record. And now with
they're the two main elements there in Ecuador are gold and copper.
And a government that's been, I won't say falling over itself because that's perhaps unkind, but really, really encouraging permitting and projects getting over the line and into development.
Yep.
Later this year, Chile has a presidential election that is expected to return a right-leaning candidate. And next year, Colombia will have one as well, again, with a right-leaning candidate expected to win. Chris, it does seem that the political access in Latin America appears to be moving to the right again, which will presumably be good for business in general and for mining in particular. What's your view there?
No, I'd agree. The left has not delivered for the masses. But why vote for a left-wing government if it's not going to deliver for you? And in Latin America, the masses are the masses. I mean, Argentina's got a pretty big middle class, and Chile's got an okay one. But most of Brazil is working class, and people at the bottom end of the economic scale, and they have to be delivered something by these left-wing governments. And it's difficult to deliver. If you suddenly say, no more oil, or no more mining, or no more this, or no more that, or no more foreign investment, and you can't generate the investment yourself, you can't borrow, it looks like you're not able to deliver because you can only really deliver out of tax revenues, borrowings, and royalties. And if you're not getting them, you've got nothing to give to your voter base. But the classic problem on the right wing is that the right wing get elected by 51% of the population, and then they start representing the 1%. And they've got to wise up that you've got to deliver for the middle classes. You've got to deliver for 51% at least of the population, not just going back, as is particularly the case in Chile, where they pander to the 1%. The people who live in Las Condes, and, their economic interests, and ignore those of the masses. And so we will, unless the right wing pull their socks up, they will get into power, waste their time in power, as Macri did in Argentina between 2015 and 19, and then you cycle back to the left wing. Milei in Argentina is very sort of like appealing to the middle class, and he's not doing anything particularly for the 1%. In fact, in some ways, he's taking away privileges that the 1% have got for themselves. So the right wing parties really need to wise up that their constituency is the people who vote them into power, not the 1% who might own a few newspapers or big businesses. They're not going to get you re-elected.
Well, I would agree with you there, Chris, and that's quite interesting in light of what we're going to be talking about next. One president that claims he is good for business, yet seems intent on harming it, is US President Donald Trump. He paused his trade tariff rampage, but he has not done disrupting. This week, he ordered a Section 232 review of the critical minerals space in response to China putting further restrictions on certain critical minerals exports, including heavy rare earth elements, which was its response to Trump's imposing trade tariffs on China well into triple digits. This is what we call escalation. Chris, you follow the critical mineral space very closely. So what will a Section 232 probe find?
Well, what will it find? Well, it's almost, your question is quite loaded there, because we know that it's going to find that the Chinese are guilty even before they've started the investigation, and then the Chinese are going to be punished. But the problem is that the Chinese have got the stuff and the US doesn't have the stuff. So if the US punishes China's exports with tariffs of 25, 125, 525%, it's ultimately the US users who are going to be paying the taxes, the tariffs, because the tariffs are going to be on the imports. The Chinese users, the Chinese supply chain, which might be from a rare earth through a magnet into an EV, it's not going to change the price at all of a Chinese EV. It's just going to make it that much cheaper than a US EV. And so that's going to create a situation where the US will become massively uncompetitive, because high labor costs. China's not a cheap labor place anymore, but comparatively speaking, the US, with its litigious environment, its difficult bureaucracy, and the bureaucracy, firing people doesn't get rid of bureaucracy. The US is as bureaucratic as ever. And so it's a big problem that they're going to find China guilty, and guilty as charged, and the tariff response will then be enormous self-harm for the US, because there is a gap. No matter with the best will in the world, the US is not going to have a rare earth industry, or an antimony industry, or a tungsten industry, or a tin industry, or anything within 3 or 4 years. It's not going to have a tin industry at all, because it doesn't have any tin. And that's by the by. And it doesn't have more than one antimony project of any consequence. So it's not going to be able to solve its own problems by blaming China. It's going to have this gap between now, where it has nothing in these critical metals, and a few years down the track when it might have something in some of them. But blaming the Chinese for 40, 50 years of US torpor, I'm afraid it's a bit like, killing the messenger there.
Well, I think I would agree with you there. China has been building its critical minerals capacity for decades. And so if the US wants to act, what can it really do? As you mentioned, if it puts tariff on these minerals, these elements, it's only going to be self-harm. And it lacks the ability to create critical minerals capacity or processing anytime soon. So realistically, what can it do? Or realistically, it would seem the thing it could do would be...
Some people seem to think that subsidies are the answer. That so the first step is you block the imports via tariffs, and then you give big subsidies to players. The beautiful irony of all this is that even in the spaces like copper and gold, but we look at the specialty metals, the companies that are playing in the sandbox are Canadian, they're Australian. The largest copper producer in the US is Rio Tinto from London. the whole US mining industry, or most of the US mining industry, is owned by foreigners. And they're going to be the ones making the profits out of this.
Just today, Alcoa, the US aluminium company, was reporting on its results for the first quarter, and it said it took a sort of $20 million hit due to the tariffs on aluminium or aluminum. I looked through the responses to the Section 232 investigation under the Trade Expansion Act into copper this week, and a number of sector participants made suggestions for boosting US copper production. And they range from easing permitting, removing unhelpful EPA or US government regulations, environmental relations, to using executive orders to rapidly permit projects. And of course, government funding. Chris, it seems that many mineral developers want less government intervention, but yet on the other hand, they're also very happy to take government money. Seems a bit of a contradiction there.
Oh, totally. They're talking out of both sides of their mouth at the same time.
What would you do? What actions would you take, Chris, to get mining moving in the United States?
Definitely the permitting in the US is nightmarish. Nevada has a good reputation, but many other places do not. And it takes ages to get the permitting. But, the reality is that the US mining space has shriveled. The mining players have shriveled. Out of the Dow 30, 40 years ago, maybe 4 or 5 out of the 30 were big miners. Saco, Southern Peru Copper, various other companies that were Phelps Dodge, that are now no longer with us. Utah Corporation, ones that were bought, Kennecott Copper, they were all bought by foreigners and taken out of US sort of circulation. The capital markets aspect of US mining is undeveloped, and I don't think that there's anything that the US government can do to help that. Freeport-McMoran's biggest mine is in Indonesia, and Freeport-McMoran is like the largest, diversified miner in the US. So there you go. Its largest project is not there. And Freeport-McMoran used to be big in the DRC, and the DRC, really forced the sale of Tengeh Fungurume, and it resulted in US losing position in Africa. But what did Washington do? Not really very much. It just sort of left the issue pendant. So the foreigners really are running all these industries, whether they're in the US or elsewhere. And the US capital markets and the US mining corporate space is very, very poorly populated.
Okay, one sort of positive note coming out this week. Ivanhoe Electric said it received a letter of interest from the US Export-Import Bank to provide up to $825 million in debt financing for the development of its $1.15 billion Santa Cruz copper project in Arizona. Ivanhoe is due to publish a pre-feasibility study on the project in June for an 80,000 ton per year copper cathode operation that is due to produce for about 20 years. The company is working towards an initial construction in 2026. Chris, how important is this type of funding availability from the government to develop projects? As an investor, does it give you confidence to invest in a company, in a project, knowing that the government is putting in money as well?
Yeah, no, it does help. Definitely helps. But of course, Ivanhoe Electric is a Canadian company, and it's got big Saudi equity participation because of the work that Robert Friedland's done to get the Saudis on board there. Once again, it's not a US company that's developing the largest new copper mine in the US.
Okay, well, that's all we have for today. Christopher Ecclestone, thank you very much for joining us again.
Good. Thank you very much.
And of course, if you like what you see, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. I'm Paul Harris, and this is Kitco Mining.